Alright, g'day Rick, how are ya? Just get back on this straight away, try and fly through it. In response to the absence of studies, just to pick one, do vaccinated children develop autism at higher rates than those that don't? It was actually one of the largest studies ever that studied this. The autismspeaks.org team themselves published the findings of this study, as it shows that in fact there exists no evidence that vaccinated children have higher rates of autism. I would think autism advocates would be the first to raise an alarm if there was indeed a link. Autism Speaks, and on the subject of pertussis, it is my understanding this is administered prenatal, is that correct? Yes, but it's also part of the Dtap, which they get it. Well, in Australia, this is the schedule. It's probably similar in America and other developed countries, but so they get the prenatal pertussis, which I think was a dual strain. It had something else. It might have been tetanus, I don't know, but there was pertussis and something else prenatal. Then at 2 months, well, there's the hepatitis B on the first day of birth. That's obviously not pertussis, but it's still a aluminum-containing vaccine, which I'll circle back to. And then the Dtap, which obviously the P is the pertussis. It's at 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, and then maybe 18 months and 4 years, or I'd have to double check that. But they get it a few times in that first 6 months of life, as well as prenatal. Now, as for the study, I had a flick through the Autism Speaks study, and it's pretty similar to what Australia's done, in the sense that they haven't actually done their own study. They haven't looked at any people with autism. They haven't explored any sort of things themselves. All they've done is meta-analysis, which means they've analysed the data from other studies. And all the studies focus on MMR and thimerosal. So they don't really, it's not exactly vaccinated versus unvaccinated. It's vaccinated with the MMR versus not vaccinated with the MMR. It's not to say that there wasn't other vaccines and whatever, this or that. So that's, I mean, yeah, you could say the MMR doesn't cause autism, or there's no causal relationship, but even that's debatable when you really get into some of the studies that they use for these big, large meta-analysis studies. There's a couple little issues here and there, but I won't go into that because that's not really the basis of my argument. The MMR, and not even really pertussis. Well, it would have sounded like that at the beginning, but the basis of my argument is vaccines plural. Like the whole schedule, whether it's the Hep B on the first day, or whether it's the pertussis prenatal, or the 2 month Dtap, or the 6 month. Or, you know, maybe there is a rare incidence with the MMR at 1 or 2 years of age. But, well, there almost definitely is, and I can show you some stuff on that too. But, and just to speak to autismspeaks.org, they're one of the largest autism charities in the world, and as such, they got so big, you might say they lost their way a little bit. But I don't know that much about them, but I have heard an interview done by one of the founders' daughters, and it sounds like she might have even been the inspiration. I can link this and give you the timestamp, but this is just a quick.
Have you on again soon.
A quick thing.
Thank you for your dedication over the years.
Hopefully you can hear.
I'm brand new to this. Okay? You and I talk a lot. I learn a lot, and we're going to continue to do so and get to the bottom of this. Are we conspiracy theorists because we want obvious answers to obvious questions? I don't think so. Mark,
the burden of proof lies on the people that want to say there's no increase, not on us.
That's right.
You know, to be dismissed as tinfoil hat people. It's the burden of proof is on them. When will we face up to this?
And we'll get to it in a second.
Great, Mark. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Adele. Talk soon.
I told you I had a star-packed show, and I do, because I have an interview coming up now with someone who's, like Mark Blackswell and other people, has been at this a very, very long time, has deep insight into what I think is interesting about this person coming up is the behind-the-scenes work to try and make a difference, to try and do what's right. And I have some hard questions on where have we failed, why have we failed, and how are we going to move forward. Take a look. This was Katie Wright on the Oprah Winfrey Show.
We have a national epidemic going on today, and I really want to stress that doctors really need to be more aware. And this is real. This is really rising. Look how hard it was for us to get a diagnosis. It was so hard. So numbers are exploding.
Yeah, and when you came up here, you said to me,
the vaccine connection has not been refuted at all. In fact, we give 37 vaccines to babies under the age of 18 months. Nobody has shown that that's safe, a wise idea, the multiple vaccines at once. My son is sick all the time. He has constant immune reactions to everything. His allergies are exploding. I mean, if you look at food allergies, asthma, autism, it's all connected.
well, I'm going to let you, I said I was going to let you say it because I said when you got home, you would be crazy that you didn't say it.
Thank you so much.
She wanted to say
Thank
it, and
you.
I wanted to get it out
All right, I have with me Katie Wright. Katie, first of all, can you tilt your camera down just a little bit so we get a little bit more of you and less of the wall? Beautiful. Great. We're lo-fi here. Katie, first of all, it's an honor to have you on the show.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. I enjoy listening to Mark and Dr. Mercola so much.
Yeah, they're great. It's really, they're great people out there. And you've been around Mark. You've been around. I mean, you've been in this movement for a really long time. Just quickly, what got you into this autism discussion? Why are you?
Oh boy, I got into it like a lot of people just because my son was developing typically, and he was fine and had 500 words, and he was really affectionate and had great motor skills. And after a couple of 12 months and 18-month vaccines, he had a bad reaction, not a terrible reaction, and then he just disintegrated. And he became so ill with staph, strep, pneumonia. And by the time he was a little bit older than 2, he didn't have one word. He just would bang on the floor all day, and he didn't even recognize his own family. So it was a pretty dramatic descent into autism for him. And then my parents, of course, formed Autism Speaks, and I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have formed Autism Speaks if not for that dramatic regression. Because if your child is, you get a sense that something's off from the beginning, it's horrible. It's horrible in a different way. It's not horrible in what happened. And just like me, they were like, something's wrong. This is crazy. How can this be happening?
So, and you, I'm going to, look, if I go too far, you let me know. And I'm not here to bash. I'm not here to bash anybody, but I have serious questions because, as you know, I'm fairly new to this. 2 years ago, we released Vaxxed. I was a producer on the daytime talks to the doctors before I came into this discussion. I've been reading, I've been looking, I've been talking to lots of people in this movement. So I'm wondering if you can help clarify a few things for me.
Sure.
So number one, your father, Bob Wright, was the head of NBC or?
Correct.
Okay, head
for
of
20
NBC.
years.
Dynamic individual in Hollywood.
Right.
And he sees your child get injured and wants to do something about it. I mean, as any grandparent would. And he forms Autism Speaks.
Correct.
And now, are you a member? Were you an initial member? Were you a part of Autism Speaks from the beginning?
I was like on the outside because in the beginning I was so consumed with taking care of Christian. I had just had another baby. I didn't have a minute. But then as time went on, I became more involved, and My dad has had cancer and he's had open heart surgery. And I think his experience with doctors is one that he really solved his problems. And doctors are good at stuff like plumbing stuff. They're great at unblocking your arteries and things like that. So his experience was really a good one. And as I read evidence of harm and I talked to great people like JB, and I became literally nauseous, like remembering those reactions and thinking, oh my God, he's got every single solitary symptom of mercury poisoning. And my dad was initially really concerned too, but then they told him that all the mercury was out of the vaccines. So I called my pediatrician thinking, of course she's going to reassure me because this happened in 2000. And I talked to the nurse and she's like, oh, well, we weren't legally obligated, and why should we throw out those perfectly good vaccines? We could use up all the mercury vaccines on the shelves until January 2004. And I'm like, oh my God, you gotta be kidding me. So there was a big learning curve. And initially so, my dad was really interested in that.
And now the issue that people have, I mean, look, we don't really have any exact numbers on the amount of parents of autistic children that believe the vaccines caused their autism. We know that it's a large group of people. I mean, I've met thousands. If you look online, there's tens of thousands. If you look around the world, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people that have openly and very carefully explained how they saw this regression in their child. But when you go to Autism Speaks website, they say specifically vaccines do not cause autism. And that's something that really, really bothers a lot of people, especially since,
me too.
Since Autism Speaks is, I think, the #1 foundation dealing with autism. I believe they have the highest amount of funding that's come in. What made them come to that determination? I've looked at it. I'll be honest, Katie. I have looked into this, and there are no studies saying that vaccines, plural, do not cause autism. They cannot make this statement. It is a total hoax. I mean, the CDC can't make it. Our government can't make it. The HHS cannot make this. They are lying to the people when they say vaccines don't cause autism. They can use their fraudulent studies and things around the MMR vaccine, and I would not be able to, I would sit here and say, they can say, based on the way they've done their science, MMR does not cause autism. I don't agree with that, but they can make that statement because they have done studies that back that assertion up. But to say vaccines in general, which means all other 15, there's 16 vaccines, the other 15 have never, ever, ever looked at do they cause autism, yet on the CDC's website, vaccines don't cause autism.
Oh, it's such a load of BS.
It's total BS. But why did Autism Speaks pick up on the BS? Who were they working for? What the hell happened?
At first, my dad was in disbelief, and I think he just saw me as a lot of dads see their daughters, like, she's emotional, she's going through all this, and I was a history major. I was working in psychology. I was no science expert. So he said, listen, I'm going to go to the CDC and talk to them about this. And I'm sure we're going to see, there's a lot of great safety stuff going on, and there's a lot of independent research going on, and I'll reassure you and everything will be fine. Okay, so he goes to the CDC, and he's a lawyer, and he realizes they can't be sued. And to have he worked for GE a lot of years, and to have a product that you don't have to be accountable to anybody if it's safe or not, and you can't be sued, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. And then, but the worst part is he spent time with the people at the vaccine department, and they were unimpressive people. And their whole response was, well, we can't be sued, so we're really not that worried about safety issues. And yeah, some people are going to have bad reactions, and that's just the way it is. I'm like, and it's for them to decide to take this kind of risk with our children with no informed consent. So my dad was really horrified at that. But then I think he got back to Autism Speaks board, which is mainly men, mostly older men, and not men who take care of these kids. And they're in corporate America, and they work in fields that are conservative. And they got, they surrounded themselves with very conservative medical authorities from all hospitals saying, you go down this road, you're going to tear apart the autism community, you're going to ruin everything, and we're going to try this genetic route first, and we're going to have great success, and then you'll see. Okay. So fast forward 15 years later, zero success, Nothing accomplished.
And that's where Autism Speaks money is going. It's going into genetic research to see where's the genes that cause autism.
Right. And there was the first, Jerry Dawson was the president for a long time, and then it was Rob Bryn, and the two of them together must have wasted $300 million. And they promised, they're like, oh yeah, this is all going to pay off. You're going to see disaster, no success. So my feeling is like they've had their at bat, and they're 0.0.
Now, I heard this story. I don't know if it's true again. And what I say to people about this show is, look, most of the time, like when you do a show, you pre-interview someone and then you know what they're going to say. I have no idea what you're going to say. What I say is this is how, what this show is, this is how I do journalism. This is what you don't usually see is the questions that went on before everyone came on camera. I want to do it on camera. And I'm going to ask you a question because I heard a story that when Autism Speaks started, there was a gigantic fund that came forward from some people at the top of Home Depot. And that when that happened, that they said you can have these tens of millions of dollars, as I understand it, with only one rule: you cannot look at vaccines. Is that true? Is that a lie?
I know it sounds like it could be true. The person who gave that money is very much affiliated with the CDC and a big fan of their work, and does not believe vaccines have anything to do with autism. And it doesn't surprise me. I think that could very well be true, sadly.
So from the beginning, we had the largest autism nonprofit trying to help with autism, and what they decided from the beginning was, we will investigate autism, but we'll look at everything but vaccines.
Right.
That's like saying, I mean, when I think about this, that's like saying we have a murderer loose, we have a body in the house, they may still be in the house.
So yeah, I'll post a link for that, but you sort of get the picture. It's, whether this is all true, I don't know, but it raises questions. It raises legitimate questions based on the other evidence that I've sort of observed. And just speaking of the genetic side of it, that's sort of been the focus from our government as well. Like it's all early intervention, behavioural, so therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy. They want to, it's behavioural. And then the other thing is they want to do genetic testing. So we had this done. We went along to the geneticist, and I'll just read this letter. I had to go through a big pile of stuff to find this, but I'll just read this. Dear Paul, Ree, Mason, Hudson, Ryan, this letter summarises our discussion in the Ballarat Genetics Clinic on 7th of November 2018, where we met for genetics assessment of Mason owing to his medical history, which includes severe receptive and expressive language delay, hearing testing September 2007, normal right, blah, 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 challenging behaviours, eczema, facial features that are slightly distinctive from the family, investigations arranged by Mason's paediatrician looking for an underlying cause of his medical issues included a genetic test called a chromosome microarray. The aim of a microarray is to identify pieces of missing, deletion, or extra, duplication, genetic information. The chromosomes are the physical structures which contain the genes, and the genes, blah, blah, blah. There are thousands of genes, and they are arranged on the chromosomes as if on a string. There are 46 chromosomes in 23 pairs. One from each pair is inherited from the mother and from the father. When Mason's chromosomes were examined, it was found that he has a very small amount of genetic information present in an extra copy on one chromosome 17. This is called a microduplication, and in Mason's case it involves chromosome region 17p11.2. The chromosome test that was used to identify this information in very fine detail. Some of the abnormalities it identifies have been linked to health problems, whereas others are normal variation, blah, blah, blah. At present, there is also no reason to believe that having 3 copies of either of these genes would lead to health problems for Mason. in the future. At this stage, we do not have a clear genetic explanation for Mason's autism. No idea, obviously. Or severe language delay. An underlying genetic diagnosis is possible for Mason, given his constellation of features. We were not able to identify a particular diagnosis in this clinic. Okay, so that's the extent of it. So my autistic son has a chromosomal abnormality. They don't know why. They don't know what the relationship is, if there is one. They've just got no idea. And so when I went in here, I'd done a little bit of research and I'd looked into a certain doctor by the name of William Walsh, PhD. Brilliant man. He's seen over 6,000 autistics. He's got their blood work, their histories. He actually sort of really tries to break down the mechanics of how these kids work. And he's come to the conclusion, and everything I've sort of observed along the way just sort of backs him up. I've been following him obviously since before, whenever this was, November 2018, because I had this conversation with the geneticist when we got to the end of it all, and she was basically like, not sure. I put it to her that, because basically her summary was that they've been looking for the autism gene for 30 years and they've had no success. So I said to her, have you ever heard of Dr. William Walsh? She said, yes. I said, I've been looking into his work, and I might be speaking out of school because I'm a moron that just digs holes for a living, but there appears to be genetic components and environmental factors in autism, which means it's not genetic, although there's genetic factors. The fact that there's environmental factors and genetic factors would mean it's epigenetic. And she agreed. She believed that yeah, Bill Walsh is a legitimate doctor, and she, was pretty glowing of him in her reaction, and she agreed that autism appears to be epigenetic. So if there's genetic factors, and they don't understand them, obviously, there could be multiple genetic factors stemming from multiple causations, you might say, different mechanisms from different things in different people. Like, who knows? I don't know. They don't know. But for that study that you referenced about pertussis, the prenatal pertussis, for those to exclude 2.3% or whatever it was, based on genetic abnormalities, that's concerning based on what we sort of understand about this. And so another thing I do when I flick through, I look for little things like that, and there's no explanation as to why they were excluded. The only explanation I could conceive is that the data had a spike that showed causation, and to get rid of that spike, well, I'm guessing that they would have juggled things around to see the best method to get rid of the spike. Just hypothesizing here. But to get rid of that spike, it would be to remove children with autism, a diagnosis of autism that had chromosomal abnormalities. You take away those children, you take away the spike, and the study all of a sudden fits the agenda. Now, what's the agenda? Proving a negative? No. Proving that that there's no causal relationship. I'm just trying to bring up the study here. Okay, I agree. Follow. Got to get all the way to the bottom. Okay, financial disclosure. This is always the interesting part of a study. For me, the little bit of conspiracy mind in me that thinks, well, what's people's motive? Who stands to gain? And what do they gain in the process? Excuse me. So, we have doctors such and such received funding from GlaxoSmithKline Biologicals for a separate study of a tetanus, diphtheria, acellular pertussis vaccine. So they received funding from a drug company that makes billions of dollars selling vaccines. So straight away we have a conflict of interest. Funding supported by Kaiser blah 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 research funds. I haven't looked into them, but for all we know, they receive funding from one of the big four as well, GlaxoSmith or Merck. Potential conflicts of interest, receive funding from GlaxoSmithKline for a separate study of a tetanus. Okay, so they've received funding, so they have a potential conflict of interest, and there's an anomaly in their data, as far as I'm concerned, that hasn't been explained. That I can find. If you can find an explanation, I'm open to reassessing my view on it. But at the moment, it seems like what you call tobacco science. It's been funded by the industry, and it has a predetermined outcome. They've got an outcome, and they've looked for it, and they've found it by getting rid of the spike in the data. So that's that one for now. Where else were we? So we've done that. We've done the Dtap. Source shared that. Oh, the infographic. Yeah, shared that contradicts the findings in the study. Yes, okay. I'll post the link because I did find that. And I also found a critique of it. Well, not so much a critique. Well, yes, a critique, because it came from Stanley Plotkin. And if you're not familiar with who Stanley Plotkin is, he is widely considered the godfather of vaccines. He wrote the book on vaccines. He's who all the current big people like the Paul Offits, and they all quote and reference him, and he gets paid by all the pharmaceutical companies to be like a spokesman, you might say. He invented the rubella vaccine and some others. He was involved in others. He's just, he's an old school bloke. And in 2017 or 18, he put himself forward for a deposition to argue in the case of a case in court of a mother that didn't want to vaccinate and a father that did want to vaccinate. And he went in to speak on behalf of the father, volunteered his services, to speak glowingly about vaccines. But he sort of walked into a bit of a trap because the defence had done their homework, and they held him up for about 9 hours and just quizzed him on everything. And I mean everything. Went through all his funding, all the research he did on vaccines and experiments on disabled people, and the controversy around the AIDS, how that sort of, just drilled him. And one of the things that came up, and I sort of forgot about it because I'd seen this deposition a while ago, and I was looking through it the other day because I wanted, I knew that they discussed this study that I had an infographic for. I knew that they discussed that, and in the process I also heard him talk about Dr. Peter Arby, or the other study that had the 5-time mortality, the DPT study in Africa. I heard him speaking about that at length, so I made a note of the timestamp, and I'll include a link to that. It's 9 hours, so I'll include some timestamps too, so you don't have to watch the whole thing. But if you are interested, it is a treasure trove of information. I watched it twice, 18 hours. Like that's, I love this shit. But I need to understand it all. I've got no choice, because when we first got our diagnosis, we had doctors saying, "Oh, we're not really sure, we don't know, oh, maybe this or maybe that, or could be this, or we're not really sure." There's a lot of assumptions and a lot of sort of, he might never talk and blah, blah, blah. So I digressed and lost my train of thought there. But yeah, point being, I've got to understand this shit. And so I went through 18 hours and found, and I sort of flicked through it again in the last few days, obviously to find where the discussions were around the study that I had the infographic for, and also the other study in Africa. So I'll just give you a little taste of it. Okay, I'm on of 3 hours and 9 minutes.
This is the start of media labeled number 1 of the
sufficiently documented to be acceptable or to change vaccination practice. So WHO does not recommend against the use of whole cell pertussis vaccines. Quite the opposite. They do recommend them.
You said non-placebo controlled. What do you mean?
I mean that essentially what Peter does, and I'm not criticizing him because obviously it is very difficult to do, but he doesn't have randomly vaccinated or children who randomly receive pertussis vaccine or don't receive pertussis vaccine. What he has is he follows children who have received this or that or the other vaccine and tries to draw conclusions from what he sees. But in the absence of random administration, you don't know for sure whether it's the vaccine or other factors that are operating.
So in the study that I mentioned to you, if the children were either that were exposed to DTP and unexposed were randomized, that would make the study valid.
Yes. And again, the WHO has at least twice gone over Peter's studies and has decided that they are not of sufficient proof to change their recommendations.
Do you have a copy of those reports from the WHO?
Oh, gosh.
Because I'm going to make a demand for those WHO reports. Do you remember when those reports came out?
Oh, within recent years. I don't remember the year.
More than a year ago?
Probably, yes.
Okay. Peter Abe's study just came out last year.
Well, I imagine WHO will reconsider them, but his studies suggesting that pertussis vaccine may increase mortality have been around for a while. Not the first study that he's done, and also one has to appreciate the context. By that I mean that he's also shown or attempted to show that live vaccines like measles vaccine has a very positive effect on mortality. In other words, that in his observations, those who receive measles vaccine suffer from fewer diseases in general and have a lower mortality. And that effect.
So he's just trying to put a real positive spin on vaccines here. That he's going off point a little bit, and he's just legitimising Dr. Peter Abe. Like he's obviously doesn't have a bias if he's coming to positive conclusions on other things, and he's saying it is what it is.
His data relate to the possibility that vaccines have effects beyond the specific disease that they're designed for.
So you agree with his findings regarding live vaccines?
I agree because, as I've said, and as I advised him years ago, that he has to find some immunological correlate to his findings, or otherwise they're not believable. And what's happened is that scientists not working with Peter have looked at measles vaccination and have shown that the vaccine has effects on what I referred to as natural killer cells before, and that they do seem to reduce mortality against other diseases. So, science works that way. One scientist does not
Yeah, okay.
gain acceptance for his findings unless they're repeated elsewhere and unless they're consistent with the entire range of facts, not just single ones.
Peter Abbe is a respected researcher, correct?
I'm sorry?
Is a respected researcher.
He's a respected researcher. I respect him, just as I respect many other scientists who are attempting to find out things that we don't.
So he does circle back to that too. At some point, how you're saying the issues that it's not randomized. Might be a bit further on, but yeah, they circle back to it, and I'm pretty sure that they established that the way that it was done, that it actually was randomized. It's an interesting thing. You'll have to check it out, but that's the brunt of it. And yeah, hopefully that clears a couple of things up there. I've got a little bit more information, but I'll try not to hit you all at once. I'll be here for hours, so I'll wrap it up because I've got that alarm was letting me know that the water distiller is ready and it's about to overflow. So I've just got to wrap this up. And yeah, let me know what you think. Cheers.